why doesn't prayer work? When I am with children, particularly in the parish, after Mass, a child will come up to me and say, "Hi, Father James," and I talk to them. Often I get down on my increasingly creaky knees to be at their head level, just to have a proper conversation with the child, but also to try and see the world from what a 6-year-old's perspective. And when you do that, because I often forget when we're adults, when we do that, you see that the world is a lot bigger because you're looking up at a lot more. And when the world's a lot bigger, that means there's a lot more excitement, a lot more possibility and opportunity, but there's also more to be afraid of. You see the world in a completely different way. Now, when I was 6 years old and in infant school, Grange Infant School, it's right near St Helens in Canning Town, there used to be a tractor driver, or not a tractor driver, he had a lawnmower. And he'd come and mow the lawn during the summer months. So when we were out playing, we'd see him mowing the lawn and we had to stay a bit away. But sometimes we'd be allowed on the grass to play. Now, he was wearing one of those masks you wear. I think there we go. So one of those kind of to prevent the pollen going into your throat and whatnot. And it looked something like this. But to a 6-year-old boy, a man on a tractor wearing that kind of mask looked a lot like this. It was absolutely terrifying. I was terrified of this man. So imagine, it's probably just a little fly-mow thing like that, but to me it looked like a massive truck. And every time he saw us, we were running away from him, he saw us, he would laugh like, ha, 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 like that. But that turned into, ha, 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 I'm going to get you. He'll be screaming, oh, please don't let him kill us, please don't let him kill us. He was absolutely terrifying. Now, this guy was probably just a sweet old man who'd come to volunteer to help to cut the grass, but to me, he was pure evil. Absolutely pure evil. And so, turn to James's first thing today. Why you don't have what you want is because you don't pray for it. I prayed that something really bad would happen to this man when I was 6 years old. So I'd go home at the night and I'd say, God, please protect me from the evil, bad man who's out to get me in the Bane mask. Yeah? I'd pray and I'd pray and I'd pray. Thank God, God said no to that prayer. Don't you think? Imagine that. Imagine God said, James, your wish is my command. 6-year-old James, I'm going to go and get him. I'm going to get him fired. Or worse still, I'm going to make something bad happen to him so you never have to confront him again. God had said no to my 6-year-old prayer because he could see, obviously, a lot more than I could. And in fact, by saying no, he helped me to overcome my fear because I grew up and I realized he was just a sweet old man. Sometimes God's no is more important than his yes because it allows us to see the world as he sees it. So that's why sometimes we get a no to our prayer. But what about when we do pray for something? Now, this is probably a common experience for most of us, when we can say to ourselves, but okay, well, I'm not praying for a man in a lawnmower to get fired from his job. I'm praying for real stuff, good stuff, the stuff that God tells me to pray for, and I'm still not getting it. Why is that? For example, forgiveness. We've all got some hurt in our lives. There's probably someone we're finding it hard to let go of a resentment against. There's some kind of argument we've not resolved. There's something going on in our lives. There is for nearly all of us. I know there is in mine. And we think to ourselves, well, that's good, isn't it? But why can't I overcome this affliction? Why is this still bugging me? Well, then we have James's second challenge. And maybe it's a bit harder than the first. He says, when you do pray and you don't get it, it's because you have not prayed properly. You have prayed for something to indulge your own desires. And we might be thinking, well, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have prayed for that Ferrari. Not that. I mean, if we're asking for forgiveness, the ability to forgive someone who's hurt us, that's a good thing to ask for. Why don't we get it? I'll give you an example from my own life, something I came up against recently. I used to have a friend, and we were friends for quite a few years, who hurt me deeply. I think we hurt one another, actually. It was a good few years ago now. And But as the course of time went along, I prayed for forgiveness, and it seemed to be that we had a decent enough relationship, though at a distance. I could think kindly on this person. So there's real progress there, to the point where I thought to myself, I finally let it go. I've forgiven that person. Until a few weeks ago, when another friend gave me some juicy gossip. Everyone likes a bit of gossip. We shouldn't, but we do. Yeah? And they told me about how this former friend, the person I thought I'd forgiven, had fallen on a bit of a hard time. Yeah? Had a bit of a mishap and things weren't going so well. And I enjoyed it. I know. Yeah? I started to enjoy it. I said, oh, tell me more. What happened? Oh, really? That bad? Oh, terrible. Oh, I went to bed. This is terrible. At night time you should be doing penance, right? I went to bed smiling. I woke up the next morning, I'm like, what has happened to me? I thought I'd forgiven this person, and yet I enjoyed their misfortune. When that person had been brought close to me again, the actual feelings of distaste and hatred and dislike, they came back to me. And that was a shock. I'd been praying not for forgiveness, but for something else. I'd been praying to despise this person. Now, to despise someone is actually worse than hatred, because it means this. I looked up in the dictionary. Despise, it's from Latin, despicere, which means to look down at someone from a great distance. And that's often what we do when we believe we've forgiven, or when we say we've forgiven. All we've done is removed ourselves from that person, and now we look down on them with something like contempt. But because they're far away, then it doesn't really touch us until they come close. That's not forgiveness. And so even though we've prayed for it and we've taken actions to feel like we've forgiven someone, what have we done? We prayed to indulge our own desires. And God says no. God says no. Forgiveness isn't a prayer that gets answered overnight. When we've been hurt, and when we've hurt someone deeply, it's a process. It's a journey. It's something we have to travel through and learn from and suffer the slings and arrows of our own sinfulness. And Jesus shows this to the apostles again and again and again. Remember last week, Peter confesses Jesus as the Christ. He says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And what does Jesus do? He says, well done. And Peter gets puffed up. All of a sudden, he's elevated above the other apostles. And what does he do? He looks down at them. And from his elevated position, Jesus slaps him down and says, no, you've got it all wrong. You're not elevated to be far from people, but like me, raised on the cross, you're elevated to be close to me and to your fellow sinners. And so Peter gets slapped down. And in today's gospel, Jesus repeats it again. He says, the Son of Man must suffer, be crucified at the hands of the elders, and rise again on the third day. Notice how the apostles stay quite quiet this time. Peter stepped up before, and they're like, whoa, we're not going to step into that one. They don't understand what he's talking about. They don't understand what real forgiveness is, to be forgiven and also to forgive. So Jesus has to show them. Because what are they doing straight after he says this? They're fighting about who gets the highest position. Who gets to despise the most, to remove themselves from the reality of others and their own. And so Jesus, he grabs a child. He takes 6-year-old you, 6-year-old me, and says, anyone who welcomes this child welcomes me. That 6-year-old child, that 6-year-old you, that 6-year-old me, is the one who is open to life, is open to experience, has not yet been fully touched by the sin of the world, both their own and others, and is ready to love. In fact, they can do nothing else but love. They look on their peers with love and dependency and urgency. And he says, you must not become childish, you must not become like little children, but you must journey back through your sin, through your history, to become like this child. In them I rest my authority. That's the pattern of the cross. That's the process of the redemption of the cross in our lives. It doesn't happen overnight. You know, it says Jesus touched me and all of a sudden I was converted. Great, but it didn't make you free from your sins. That's a lifelong experience. That's something we have to come up against again and again and again. So I can say to myself now, quite openly, I haven't forgiven. But I look forward to that day. I look forward to that day that I experience the Lord's forgiveness in its fullness, so that I can love as he loves. But that requires going on that journey down, so that I can grow up correctly and in his love. Now, our Alpha experience begins proper on Wednesday at 7:30. Over the last couple of weeks, you've heard the testimonies of people whose life have been changed not by Alpha, but by the experience of Jesus they had during the Alpha experience, both with their brothers and sisters, in the stories they heard, and in the testimonies of those people whose lives have been changed. And what was interesting about all the people who gave testimony, it's not as if they all came from difficult positions or struggles in life, some quite unbearable. The struggles didn't go away. It's not as if God said, right, magic, I'll lift all your troubles away from you. But rather, they came close to him. They experienced his love, and those troubles were made bearable. They began to experience the forgiveness and love of God in their troubles. And that's the path of the cross. That's the path of true forgiveness. That's the journey that God wants to take all of us on, to transform all of our lives, so that our conversion and our faith isn't superficial, but is integral and is part of our very beings, right back down to that core, right back down to that very beginning when we were children. So that one day we may look up to God our Father and genuinely say, Abba, Father, where the word forgiveness will just be another word for love, because that's what it truly is, because that's what it was for God, who assumed our flesh, took on our experience, took on our hatred and resentment, carried it all on his shoulders and turned it into love. The Alpha experience beginning this Wednesday gives us the opportunity to explore that anew. Amen.